I need you to understand something, my mother's voice crackled through the phone. No man wants a barren wife. Especially not someone like Ryan who comes from such a good family. I sat in my car outside the fertility clinic, gripping my steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The test results had only been out for 2 hours, and somehow my mother had already twisted this into another weapon against me. Just like she'd done my entire life. My name is Erin, and at 30 years old, I'm finally ready to share how my family and ex-husband tried to destroy me. But this isn't a story about defeat. It's about how I built something beautiful from the ashes they left behind. 3 years ago, I had everything that should have made them happy. A successful career in marketing, a beautiful home in suburban Connecticut, and Ryan, my husband of 2 years. We were the perfect couple in their eyes until we weren't. My parents finally seemed proud of me when I brought Ryan home. He was everything they wanted, successful, handsome, from a respected family. For once, I wasn't being compared to my younger brother Jack, their golden child. The first cracks appeared 6 months into our marriage. "When are you giving us grandchildren?" became my mother's constant refrain at every family dinner. She'd corner me in the kitchen, listing friends whose daughters were already pregnant. My father would join in with comments about continuing the family name. Ryan would squeeze my hand under the table, assuring me we'd start trying when we were ready. But my parents' pressure wore him down too, until we found ourselves at the fertility clinic much sooner than I'd planned. I remember the exact moment everything changed. The doctor's sympathetic expression, the medical terms that boiled down to one devastating fact: I couldn't have children naturally. Ryan's face remained neutral, but I saw something shift in his eyes. It was the same look my parents had given me my entire life, like I'd failed them again. That night, Ryan didn't come home. My mother called to tell me he was staying at their house because he needed time to process. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice, like she'd been waiting for this moment to prove I wasn't good enough for him. Looking back, I should have seen the signs earlier. The way my mother always introduced Ryan as our son-in-law while I was just Erin. How my father's business connections mysteriously opened doors for Ryan's career. They weren't building a family, they were crafting my replacement. I met Ryan when I was 23, fresh out of college, and working at my first marketing job in Boston. He was a decade older, already established in his career as a corporate lawyer. I still remember our first meeting at a charity gala, where he seemed genuinely interested in my ideas about digital marketing strategies. It was refreshing, being taken seriously for once. "You've finally done something right," my mother beamed when I brought Ryan home for Thanksgiving. The backhanded compliment stung, but I was too happy to care. For the first time in my life, my parents were treating me like I mattered. My mother started inviting me to lunch, something she'd never done before. My father bragged about his future son-in-law to his golf buddies. Our courtship was like something out of a romantic movie. Ryan would surprise me with weekend getaways to Martha's Vineyard, send flowers to my office, and charm everyone he met. My parents transformed into the picture-perfect family I'd always dreamed of having. Mom helped me plan elaborate dinner parties, Dad offered financial advice, and even my brother Jack seemed to accept me more. "He's exactly what this family needs," my father would say, clapping Ryan on the back during our engagement party. I noticed he said family and not you, but I pushed the thought away. I was too caught up in the fantasy of finally being the daughter they wanted. The wedding was everything my mother had imagined, down to the last peony in my bouquet. 300 guests at the country club, ice sculptures, and a 7-tier cake. Looking back, I realized she planned it more for herself than for me. But Ryan seemed happy, and I was ecstatic to finally have my parents' approval. Those first months of marriage were good, or at least I thought they were. Ryan and I moved into a beautiful colonial house in Connecticut, close enough to my parents for weekly dinners but far enough to have our own space. We hosted parties, joined the right clubs, and lived the life my parents had always wanted for me. But there was always this underlying current, subtle comments that should have been red flags. "You're so lucky Ryan chose you," my mother would say while helping me arrange flowers in my new home. Or my father's constant reminders about how much Ryan's law firm valued family values and tradition. The pressure to have children started exactly 6 months after our wedding. I remember because it was during our Christmas dinner when my mother first brought it up in front of everyone. "Ryan's not getting any younger," she announced over dessert. "And wouldn't it be wonderful to have a baby next Christmas?" I wasn't ready. My career was finally taking off, with a potential promotion on the horizon. But Ryan seemed captivated by the idea, especially after my parents started showing him photos of his law partners' growing families. "It would be good for my image at the firm," he'd say, and I found myself nodding along, just like I had my entire life. For 6 months, we tried naturally. Each negative pregnancy test brought more disapproving looks from my mother and concerned questions from Ryan. The monthly dinners at my parents' house became interrogation sessions. "Are you eating right? Are you tracking your cycle? Maybe you're working too hard." My father would sit silently, disappointment radiating from his stern expression. Then came that fateful day at the fertility clinic. The doctor was kind but direct. I had a condition called premature ovarian failure. Natural conception would be nearly impossible. I remember staring at the diagrams on her wall while she explained our options, including IVF, but her voice seemed to come from far away. Ryan's transformation was immediate but subtle. He stopped holding my hand during our drive home. That night, he slept in the guest room, claiming he needed space to think. I spent the night researching IVF success rates and creating spreadsheets to show how we could afford the treatments. But my parents had other plans. They invited Ryan over without me, something that became increasingly common. My mother would call afterward, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Ryan's really struggling with this, honey. A man needs an heir, especially in his position. Have you considered that maybe you're being selfish by keeping him in this marriage?" The whispers started at our country club. Somehow, everyone knew about my condition. Women who'd once invited me to their charity committees suddenly had schedule conflicts. My mother's bridge club friends would give me pitying looks while discussing their grandchildren. I overheard my father talking to Ryan in his study one evening when I arrived early for dinner. "Son, you're part of this family now, but you need to think about your future. There are plenty of younger women who could give you children. Caroline Mitchell's daughter just finished law school, and she comes from excellent stock." Ryan started working later hours, missing our dinner dates. When he was home, he buried himself in his phone, smiling at texts he wouldn't share. I threw myself into researching IVF options, presenting him with detailed plans and success stories. "We can save up," I'd tell him. "There are financing options. We could even ask my parents for help." That suggestion led to one of our worst fights. "Your parents?" He laughed bitterly. "Your father made it very clear he won't waste money on something that might not work. Besides, he thinks I should cut my losses now, while I'm still young enough to start over." The final straw came during a dinner party at our house. My mother cornered me in the kitchen, ostensibly to help with dessert. "I've been talking to Ryan," she said, arranging cookies on a silver platter. "He's willing to consider an annulment instead of a divorce. Wouldn't that be better for everyone? You could move back home until you figure things out." I dropped the serving spoon I was holding, watching it clatter against the marble countertop. "You've been what?" "Oh, darling," she sighed. "You must have known this would happen. What did you expect Ryan to do? He needs children to advance at the firm. Your father and I have already discussed it with his parents, and they agree it's for the best." The divorce proceedings were like watching a carefully orchestrated play, with my parents as the directors and Ryan as their star performer. He moved out of our house on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday evening he was settled into my parents' guest room. "Just until he finds a suitable place," my mother explained to anyone who asked, but we all knew it was a calculated move. I learned the full extent of their betrayal from my Aunt Susan, who'd had too much wine at a family gathering I wasn't invited to. "They've been working on Ryan for months," she told me during a secretive phone call. "Your mother's been telling him he deserves someone who can give him a real family." Your father's been introducing him to eligible daughters of his golf club friends. The isolation was systematic. Our shared friends gradually stopped returning my calls. The country club mysteriously lost my membership records. Even my childhood pediatrician, who I'd bumped into at the grocery store, awkwardly avoided eye contact. Later, I discovered my parents had been spreading their version of events. Poor Ryan, trapped in a marriage with a defective wife who selfishly wouldn't let him go. During one particularly brutal mediation session, Ryan's lawyer presented a list of demands that I later learned my father had helped draft. They wanted me to surrender any claim to our house, citing my father's down payment assistance as family money meant for Ryan's future children. The irony was bitter enough to choke on. "You're being difficult," my mother scolded when I refused to sign the initial settlement. "Ryan's being more than generous, considering the circumstances. You need to think about his future." The fact that she was more concerned about his future than her own daughters still stings when I think about it. The final straw came during a family dinner I wasn't supposed to know about. My cousin's teenage daughter secretly recorded it on her phone and sent it to me. There was Ryan, seated in my usual place at the table, while my mother gushed about setting him up with Jessica Wheeler, a fertile young associate from a rival law firm. My father was already calling him son, as if I had never existed. That night, I packed 3 suitcases and booked a furnished apartment in a quiet suburb 40 miles away. I withdrew half our joint accounts before they could be emptied, changed my phone number, and deleted all social media. My resignation letter was on my boss's desk the next morning, along with a request for a transfer to our West Coast office. "You're making a scene," my mother hissed in her final voicemail. "Think about what this looks like for the family." I saved that message as a reminder of why I needed to leave. The divorce was finalized in record time, thanks to my father's connections with the judge. I didn't fight it. Instead, I used the energy to build my new life, one where I didn't have to apologize for existing. My new apartment became my sanctuary, decorated in colors my mother would hate and filled with books instead of the formal furniture she'd always insisted upon. The hardest part wasn't losing Ryan or even my parents. It was realizing that I'd spent 30 years trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. The day I signed the final divorce papers, I also signed up for therapy with Dr. Sarah Chen, who would help me understand that my infertility wasn't a failure, but my family's reaction to it was. Therapy with Dr. Chen became my lifeline. "Your worth isn't measured by your fertility," she'd remind me during our weekly sessions. "And parenthood isn't limited to biological connections." Those words planted a seed that would later bloom into the most important decision of my life. My new job as a digital marketing director kept me busy, and my coworkers became genuine friends who knew nothing about my past. I started joining workout classes, took up painting, and slowly rebuilt my identity. My small apartment filled with canvases of bright, chaotic colors, each one representing another layer of healing. 1 year into therapy, Dr. Chen asked me a simple question. "What do you want, Erin?" Not what your parents wanted, not what Ryan wanted. "What do you want?" The answer surprised me with its clarity. "I want to be a mother," I said. "But on my terms." I spent 6 months researching fertility clinics and donor options. This time, there were no family dinners filled with pressure. No husband anxiously checking his watch. Just me making careful, informed decisions about my future. I chose a clinic in Boston, far from my old life in Connecticut. The sperm donor selection process was surprisingly empowering. I wasn't looking for someone who would impress my parents or match Ryan's social status. Instead, I chose based on health history, intelligence, and a genuine-sounding letter about why he wanted to help create families. My first IVF cycle failed. I cried in my apartment alone, but it was different from the tears I'd shed during my marriage. These were my tears, my journey, my choice. The second cycle took. When the nurse called with the positive result, I was in the middle of a client presentation. I finished my slides, drove home, and celebrated by ordering my favorite takeout and dancing around my living room. Pregnancy without family scrutiny was liberating. My friends from the community center threw me a baby shower filled with genuine joy rather than social obligations. My team at work arranged for me to work remotely when needed. Even my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, adopted the role of surrogate grandmother, bringing me homemade soup and sharing wisdom from raising her own daughters. Leah was born on a crisp October morning. 7 pounds, 3 ounces of perfect. When the nurse placed her in my arms, I felt no echo of my mother's critical voice, no shadow of Ryan's disappointment. Just pure, overwhelming love. "Hello, little one," I whispered to her. "We're going to create our own kind of family." Those early months were exhausting but wonderful. I hired Hannah, a warm-hearted college student, as a part-time nanny when I returned to work. My apartment transformed again, this time with soft blankets and colorful toys. The walls that once held abstract paintings now featured photos of Leah's first smile, first bath, first everything. Every milestone was celebrated on our terms. No formal portrait sessions or country club brunches, just genuine moments captured on my phone. Leah's first Christmas was spent in our pajamas, building a fort in the living room and making memories that belonged solely to us. The encounter happened at Whole Foods, of all places. Leah was 18 months old, sitting in the shopping cart and giggling as I made silly faces while choosing organic apples. I heard my mother's voice before I saw her. "Erin? Oh my God, is that?" My hands froze on the apple one was holding. There they were, all three of them. My mother, father, and Ryan, standing by the artisanal cheese display like some twisted family portrait. I learned later they'd been meeting for their weekly lunch dates, a tradition that apparently continued even after the divorce. My mother moved toward us first, her eyes fixed on Leah. "She's beautiful," she breathed, reaching out as if to touch my daughter. I instinctively pulled the cart back. "Don't," I said firmly. "Just don't." Ryan stepped forward, looking exactly as he had 3 years ago, but now his presence left me cold. "You had a baby," he said, his voice thick with something that sounded like regret. "How did you?" "IVF," I cut him off. "The same procedure you refused to consider when we were married." My father, ever the strategist, tried to take control of the situation. "Perhaps we could all have dinner together? Talk about things? We are her grandparents, after all." The audacity of that statement made me laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that caused Leah to look up at me curiously. "Grandparents? You lost that right when you orchestrated the destruction of my marriage." "That's ancient history," my mother interjected, her society smile firmly in place. "We've all grown. And now that you've proven you can have children." "Proven?" I felt the old familiar rage rising, but this time it was protective rather than defensive. "My daughter isn't proof of anything. She's not a trophy to show off at your country club, and she's certainly not your do-over chance at family." Ryan moved closer, using the same charming smile that had once won me over. "Erin, maybe we could talk privately? Things are different now. I'm not seeing anyone, and clearly, you've shown that starting a family is possible." "Let me be very clear," I said, my voice steady and strong. "Leah and I are a family. Complete and whole. We don't need your approval, your connection, or your conditional love. The fact that you're all standing here, seeing her as some sort of solution to our past problems, shows that nothing has actually changed." My mother's face hardened. "You're being selfish again, Erin. Depriving your daughter of her father, her grandparents, her heritage." "No, Mother. I'm protecting her from exactly what you did to me. She will never have to earn love. She will never be measured by her ability to meet your expectations. And she will never ever know what it feels like to be seen as defective by her own family." I turned the cart around, Leah babbling happily, unaware of the drama unfolding around her. As I walked away, I heard Ryan call out, "You can't keep her from us forever." I stopped and turned back one last time. "Watch me." The harassment started subtly. First came the flowers at my office with cards claiming, "We can be a real family now." Then the emails from my parents' lawyer about grandparents' rights. But Ryan's persistence turned dangerous one rainy Tuesday evening when Hannah called me at work, her voice shaking. "Mrs. Thompson, Ryan's outside the apartment," she whispered. "He's been yelling for 20 minutes. He sounds drunk. Leah's crying and I don't know what to do." I called 911 while racing home, my heart pounding. Through Hannah's terrified texts, I learned Ryan was demanding to see his stepdaughter, insisting he had rights as my ex-husband. The security footage later showed him pounding on my door, screaming about how I'd tricked him by having a baby after our divorce. When I arrived, 2 police cars were already there. Ryan was slumped against the hallway wall, reeking of expensive scotch, his designer suit wrinkled. The dignified lawyer who'd once commanded courtrooms was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. "You think you're so smart," he slurred as the officers led him away. "But that baby should have been mine. We could have had this years ago if you'd just tried harder." Hannah was trembling on the couch, holding Leah close. My precious daughter's eyes were red from crying, and something in me snapped. The next morning, I walked into the best family law office in the city, the one my father had always warned other people about. "I want a restraining order," I told Sarah Martinez, a fierce attorney who'd built her reputation protecting women from stalkers. "And I want it ironclad." The hearing was brutal. Ryan showed up with a lawyer my father had obviously hired, arguing that his prior relationship with me gave him standing to pursue a connection with Leah. My parents sat behind him in court, my mother dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. But I had evidence. Security footage, Hannah's testimony, police reports, and hundreds of unwanted messages. "Your Honor," Sarah argued, "this is a clear case of harassment driven by an entitled man who believes he has rights to a child simply because he was once married to her mother." The judge agreed. The restraining order covered both Leah and me, requiring Ryan to stay at least 500 feet away at all times. He was also banned from contacting us through any means, including through third parties. My parents' attempt at grandparents' rights died quickly when their lawyer realized they had no prior relationship with Leah and couldn't prove I was an unfit mother. Their last communication came through their lawyer. "Your parents wish to express their disappointment in your choices and will respect the court's decision." That night, after Leah was asleep, I sat with Hannah in the kitchen. She'd been terrified but chose to stay with us. "I don't understand," she said, sipping chamomile tea. "Why can't they just be happy for you?" "Because this isn't the story they wanted," I replied, watching Leah on the baby monitor. "They wanted their version of a perfect family. Instead, I created something real." Life has a way of coming full circle. 6 months after the restraining order, my cousin Emma called to give me the local gossip I hadn't asked for. Ryan had apparently been spiraling, showing up drunk at country club events and ranting about me to anyone who would listen. His law firm had quietly asked him to take a leave of absence. The golden boy my parents had chosen over their own daughter was tarnishing rapidly. "Aunt Carol and Uncle James keep telling everyone you had some kind of mental breakdown," Emma continued. "But honestly, no one's buying it anymore. Not after Ryan's public meltdowns." I found myself surprisingly unmoved by this news. The part of me that might have felt vindicated was too busy planning Leah's second birthday party, complete with a butterfly theme she'd chosen herself by constantly pointing at them in her picture books. My parents' attempts to maintain their social standing became increasingly desperate. They hosted elaborate parties, trying to prove their family was still perfect without me. But their friends had witnessed too much, seen too clearly how they'd treated their own daughter. Slowly, their circle began to shrink. Through the grapevine, I heard Ryan had tried dating several younger women from prominent families, but none of the relationships lasted. Apparently, his obsession with my betrayal and his newfound drinking habits made him less than appealing as husband material. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd left me for being defective had become exactly what he'd feared. But these stories felt like reading about strangers in a newspaper. My world had shifted to revolve around different things. Leah's first steps across our living room, her growing vocabulary, the way she scrunched her nose when concentrating on her blocks. Hannah stayed with us, becoming more family than employee, her genuine love for Leah healing some of my old wounds about what family should mean. Dr. Chen helped me process these updates during our now monthly sessions. "You've built something remarkable," she said during one session. "Not just a life for yourself, but a new definition of family." She was right. Our little family grew in unexpected ways. There was Hannah, who decided to pursue her master's degree in early childhood education while continuing to help with Leah. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door, who insisted on teaching Leah Spanish and treated us to weekly home-cooked meals. My co-workers, who became true friends, planning playdates with their children and creating a support network I never had to doubt. One evening, as Leah and I sat on our balcony watching butterflies in our small garden, she looked up at me with her bright, curious eyes and asked, "Happy, Mama?" "Yes, baby," I answered, realizing it was completely true. "Very happy. I've learned that family isn't about biology or social expectations. It's about choice, choosing to love, to support, to stay." Every morning when I watch Leah wake up, every time she reaches for my hand or shares her toddler wisdom, I'm grateful for the strength it took to walk away from what others thought I should want. My mother once told me I'd never have a real family. She was wrong. I built something better. A family based on love instead of obligation, acceptance instead of conditions, and joy instead of expectations. And every day, as I watch Leah grow, I renew my promise to break the cycle, to be the mother I needed when I was young,